Okay, so in the previous lecture, so what we discussed? We started review for micro questions or microeconomics, right? So we have reviewed 6 principles, okay? So basically we started with why we make choice, right? Think about, so there are so many choices we have to make every day, right? And the reason why we have to make choice is because resources are scarce, right? And so right now, so I want to emphasize resource. When we say resource, usually we think about tangible, okay? But actually, so in reality, so there are resources are intangible, like for example, your attention, right? And the other things I want to emphasize is, so these days we talk about climate change, right? So this clean and sustainable environment is also a scarce resource and play a more and more important roles in our daily life, and it particularly matters to our future generation, right? So that's resources. And then the second principle we studied or we reviewed is about opportunity cost. So here I want to emphasize when we say opportunity cost, it's just the highest cost or highest benefit you will forego, okay? So if you have 1 hour to spend or 1 hour to waste, so sometimes you may say, okay, so I will just do nothing. But you do nothing doesn't mean the opportunity cost of this 1 hour is nothing. Okay, so you do not consider those possibilities doesn't mean those opportunity costs is zero or does not exist. Okay, so that's just important to keep in mind. And the next we review, so we said margin. So how much is a decision at the margin? Okay, think about extra hours of study, extra bite of candy, okay, so on and so forth. And then so after that, so we said people respond to incentive. I want to emphasize here, so the incentive can be good and it can be bad, right? So the good incentive usually just encourage you to do the right things, but the bad incentive usually work as like a punishment, right? Again, so they're trying to reach the goal. But the goal is going to depend on who you ask. So either it's the government, or in the class is the professor, or in your household, your parents, right? Or if you have doing some sports, and then so you have your coaches, right? So those are the incentives to give us or help us to reach our goal. Okay? And then so next one we reviewed is about a trade. Okay, so we can gain from trade, and actually, so in this lecture, so we are going to look at production possibility frontier. So that's going to help us understand trade, and that's going to prepare us to do the next discussion. So we have entire chapters devoted to understand so how we can benefit from each other via trade. Okay. The last principle we reviewed is called equilibrium. Right? So the market eventually will move towards equilibrium. Right? So what's the equilibrium? It's just a situation no one wants to deviate. Okay? So you don't want to do one more, and you don't want to do one less. Okay? So that's the equilibrium. And then, so the actual concept we discussed in last lecture is a model, right? Just keep in mind, model is used to better understand real life, but real life is so complicated. I think about our real economy, think about the city of Omaha. Okay? So there are so many business, there are so many individuals. Okay? And so we need to, in order to better understand, so we need to do some simplification, so they simplify. Okay. So this is a simplified representation of real situation. So that's help us understand what's going on in our complicated real world. Okay. So in this lecture, so now we have a quick review what we discussed in previous lecture. So now in this lecture, let me first introduce a few important concepts. And then, so we are going to focus on production possibility frontier. Okay, so that's going to be extremely useful for us to understand a bunch of important economic questions. Ceteris paribus. So this comes from Greek. So this is a principle we have been repeatedly used in economics. Okay? So what is this principle? So this principle says, okay, so we are going to assume every other things are the same. Right? How we understand that? Let's say, for example, so usually, so there's like a rain season or there's like hurricane season throughout the year, right? And say, for example, if we want to understand how the hurricane affects the gasoline price, okay? And so usually, so why this may affect gasoline price is because hurricane is going to interrupt the oil extraction and then the refinement in Mexico Gulf states, like Texas, okay? Because hurricane comes and then they have to shut down their plant. And then the production of gasoline is going to be limited. So that's going to translate into a change in price, right? But in order to understand or answer that questions, so there are other complications. Because there are many other factors can affect gasoline price. Because usually hurricane comes during the summertime, but then summer is also the time for us to travel. And so the demand for gasoline will increase, right? So that just makes things complicated. And then in economics, we just apply this ceteris paribus principle. So for the case I just explained, so maybe we just say, okay, so let's just assume so there's no change in demand. So there's no spike in terms of travel. All right, so now let's just look at how the hurricane season affects gasoline price so that we have a clear answer. But certainty, so we need to take this estimation or take this answer with salt or very cautiously, right? But this gives an idea of what this means and why we need this principle, right? Okay, so now we are ready to study production possibility frontier, right? So inside these slides, there's a long sentence to describe what does PPF stands for, okay? So let's just break down this long sentence into small sections. First, this is a diagram, right? So the diagram. Meaning, so this is like a graphical representation. Okay, so that's the first. Now, secondly, so this diagram is used to show the following things. Combination of two goods we can produce, right? So two goods we can produce, those are the keywords. So this is second, is write down 1 and 2. All right? And here I want to emphasize here, so we said two goods. Essentially, we use two to represent more. All right, so it's like a plural, right? So once we understand how we are going to trade off between the production of two goods, and then so we can extend to 3, 4, so on and so forth. So 2 is different from 1 because you have a choice. If this is only 1, there's no choice, right? Okay, so 2 is a simplification. Okay, so the second. And remember, this is the combination of two goods we can produce, okay? So and then you face a trade-off. Should I produce more A or produce more B, right? Lastly, so this is what we can produce at full employment. Right. So again, so for the moment, you may not fully understand what does full employment means. And actually, it turns out, what you understand, the full employment, is going to differ from what economists define. Okay, just give a preview. So usually, so conventional wisdom may say, oh, so full employment means like 0% unemployment rate. But actually, in economics term, we have a slightly different number. Like say for example, US. So the full employment usually means the unemployment rate is 4%. You may wondering why is that? So let's just wait in the future. But for now, so what you need to understand is that here full employment just means we are not wasting any resource. So this is all we can do. Use all the resource we have, right? So summarize, PBF, number 1 is a diagram. Number 2, so this is about what we can produce, like a variety of goods. But here we simplify it to 2. And then number 3, so this is what we can produce, use all of our resource, full capacity. meaning so this is the best you can do, right? And by the way, here I want to emphasize this frontier, and just think about what this means in English, right? Or think about in geography, right? So when the U.S. moved toward the west, and at some point Omaha is a frontier, and then before that, so St. Louis is a frontier, right? So when I say frontier, is the furthest we can explore toward the west, and eventually we find out California is our frontier. And similarly in economics here, so what is frontier? Is the maximum amount we can produce, right? So this is how we understand this PBF, right? Okay, so PBF, it sounds a simple concept, okay? But actually it can be used to answer many big questions. So there are a few questions. First, we can use this PBF to understand how much can we produce as a society, as a country, or even as a state, as a city, right? So literally, so this PBF will tell us what is our technology frontier, right? Secondly, so we can answer the question like, what will cause us to change our mix of production, right? So for example, so if we consider the production of actual goods versus the production of clean energy, clean environment, or the better weather or climate. So that's one way to understand what do we produce, right? And then so we may say, okay, so to what extent we can have some prosperity, but at the same time we keep our environment clean, keep our climate sustainable, right? Okay, next question so we can answer is that does it make sense to import goods from somewhere else? So that is about international trade, okay? So the logic behind international trade and the ideological foundation of international trade largely relies on this simple PBF analysis. Okay, so we will touch on that in the next lecture. Okay. And actually, so we can also use this simple PBF to answer question like, so what is behind economic growth? Okay, what brings prosperity to a society? Why in 20th century, the typical American households, their standard living has been increased by 8-fold in a century. Okay, so this is actually what happened. Okay, so when we enter the 20th century, so the average American, so their income is less than 10,000. So this is in today's dollar. But end of the 20th century, so the average households or the American annual income is about 50,000. Okay, so in 1 century, so we have increased our standard of living by 8-fold. So this is called economic growth. So the PBF will give us a very quick and sharp answer, right? Okay, so now we have looked at lots of abstract things. Okay, so in the following few slides, I would like to explain to you PBF and its connection with opportunity cost via examples. Okay. Now, let's just think about we live in a hypothetical world, right? And in this economy, so we only able to produce 2 goods. And in here, so you either produce Dreamliner or you produce small jets. Okay, but again, so they just without loss of generosity, you can think of this as apple versus pear, and tablet versus computer, all right? Or even books versus magazine, food versus clothing, all right? So the point here is, so there are 2 alternative goods we can produce. Now, how are we going to produce the combination? So that's the point, okay? And here, so you can think about this as a country. or economy, or you can even think about is a business. So the analysis is going to be the same. Okay. So let's look at this table. So in the first row, so here when I say first, is this row. Okay. So in this row, if we allocate all the resource to Dreamliner, and so we cannot produce any small jet. And so what we're going to do is we put these dots on this diagram. On this diagram, so we have two goods. So and then this corresponds to this point. Now, we can look at another alternative, right? But just pay attention. So now, we want to increase the production of small jet. It comes with a cost, and then so you lose the resource you can use to produce Dreamliner, right? And then so we have another dot, and then we keep moving. Okay? And then so eventually we'll put all those dots on this diagram. And once we connect those dots, and we get a line. Okay? And this line is called PBF. Right? Okay, so furthermore, so I want to emphasize everything below this line. It's just graphically just something just underneath, right? So just inside or in this region. So that's below this line. Everything below this line, we call this is feasible, meaning so you can produce, right? Because so actually, so this is your frontier. And if you want to produce less, for example, you compare this dot versus point C. So you are able to produce, let's call this O. You can produce O, and you have no problem to produce C, right? Compare O versus C. So we produce same amount of small jet, but so you produce less Dreamliner, okay? So C is feasible. However, C is not efficient. In a sense, you are wasting your resource, part of your resource, because you can produce additional 6 Dreamliners, but you choose not to do. Right? So summarize, so everything inside, so these are feasible, but not efficient. You haven't do your best. So that's put this way. Right? But then so on the other hand, so if we look at a point like here, D, okay? And then, so this is beyond your reach. So you don't have that amount of resource to produce D. But in general, everything above this line is not feasible, right? Now, lastly, so if we focus on this line, this particular line, and then, so we say, along this line, this is feasible. Meaning, so this is what we can possibly produce. And also, this is efficient. Okay? And what efficient means we haven't wasted any resource. Okay? So we did not reserve any of our capacity, any of our effort, any of our resources. We have exhausted everything we use. Okay? So this is efficient. Not only feasible, it also is efficient. Right? So this is an example of PBF. And so in this PBF, there is an idea of opportunity cost embedded inside this diagram. Right? Now to understand that, let's just move to the next slides. Just focus on the table. So this is the same table we just saw in previous slides. Okay? Now, what is opportunity cost? So essentially, it's what you must give up in order to get a goods. And in this example, let's start with Dreamliner. Okay? You may be wondering what is the opportunity cost of producing Dreamliner. Right. So let's start with the last row. we started with no Dreamliner. And so we may want to expand the market because there is a demand for, say, for example, intercontinental flight, right? So we want to produce large airplane to accommodate customer. Yes, certainly you can increase your production, but then so you lose your production capacity to produce other things, which is small jet, right? Now remember earlier, so I told you how we calculate opportunity cost. Usually it's what? Opportunity cost is cost divided by benefit. And here, so you're trying to gain 9 Dreamliners, right? So this is your benefit. But what is the cost you pay? So here you lose this 40 minus 28, which equal to 12 small jets. So this is the cost per benefit. So that gives you the opportunity cost. All right? And actually, so yes, certainly, so here, so the answer is 4/3. But on the other hand, so we can look at the opportunity cost of small jet. We can do the similar things. The answer is going to 9 divided by 12 equal to 3/4. All right? But here I want to highlight so the connection between these numbers and the slope of this PBF. Right? You're going to see, so the slope of the PBF actually gives us the opportunity cost. The other things I want to highlight is, so here I just explained to you the opportunity cost of Dreamliner in terms of small jet and opportunity cost of small jet in terms of a Dreamliner. You will find out, so if you multiply these two numbers, they must equal to 1. Or in other words, these opportunity costs, they are reciprocal mathematically. So this is by construction, right? Because opportunity costs, so in these two, in this production possibility frontier, is 1 versus the other versus 1, right? So then, so they must, if their product must equal to 1, right? So keep this in mind. So this plays a major role when we explain comparative advantage in the chapter about trade. Okay, so now we have learned the basic concepts. Okay, now I would like to take this opportunity to ask you work on these practice questions. Okay. So I'm going to give you 1 minute to work on this, and then so we work together. All right? So please read this sentence carefully, but I can highlight the key information. Okay? So basically, so you are in the island yourself. You are the only person. And in this island, so there are only 2 things you can possibly produce: clam and a mango. And then so the resource we have or we need is your time, your effort, your labor. Okay, to simplify. So and then the current technology is, if you spend all your time, think about it, 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week, okay, it doesn't really matter, okay? Yes, but here, so it says in a week. If you spend all your time on clams, you can get 100. Or alternatively, you can get 200 mango, okay, in a week. And here, furthermore, to simplify the matter, we say it is possible for you to collect a fraction of goods, but in reality, usually it's not, right? But here, just simplify. So what this means is, so it's possible for you to collect 1.1 unit of mango, right? But in practice, so you either get 1 mango or 2 mango. There's no 0.1, right? They just simplify the matter. Now, so the question asks you to draw a sketch of your PPF for a week. And furthermore, want you to place mango on X and the clamps on Y. And furthermore, calculate opportunity cost. Now, so I have extract all the information is necessary. Okay, so please bring a pen and a scratch paper. Okay, take like 1 minute to work on this, and then we work together. Right? All right, so let's work this together. Okay, mango on the horizontal line, clams on the vertical line. So those are the two things you can possibly produce, right? So in this simplified word, okay? And then so in 1 week, if you spend all your time on mango, you can get 200. Alternatively, you can spend all your time on clam, and you can get 100, right? And then so what is your production possibility from here? So actually we simply just connect these two dots. Okay. But however, I want to emphasize, so the PPF is not necessarily a straight line. So like in the later slides, I will explain to you for some important economic reasons. So the PPF is not a straight line. But in this class, without additional explanation, usually we assume it is a straight line to simplify. Right? So now we have this PPF. Now the question asks you the opportunity cost of each good start with mango. Remember, we always use cost divided by benefit. Okay? And then so usually it means we move, let's call this A and then B. Okay, you understand that usually you just move from A to B. Because in A you have no mango, in B you have mango. Right, so this direction. And then the cost, so the benefit is move from A to B, you gain 200 mango. What is the cost? You lose 100 clams. Right? And then so the opportunity cost of a clam, then you move from B to A. Because at B you have no clam, but A you gain clam. And similarly, so the opportunity cost is cost divided by benefit. Now just reverse. All right? So these practice questions. So let's look like the other one, right? So in these questions, ask you what is the opportunity cost of each lamp. Right? Like before, So there are two possible goods we can produce. We either produce lamp or produce sofa. So the number may not make sense to you. Actually, the number sounds weird, right? Because you can, if you exhaust all your resource, you can produce 250 lamp. But if you exhaust all your sofa, you can produce 1,000. Because usually, like a lamp probably is easier to make compared to sofa. It is to me. Okay, but this doesn't hurt us to do our economic analysis, right? Okay. So the question asks, what is the opportunity cost of lamp? Again, so we use cost divided by benefit. Okay. And furthermore, so we need to identify two rows, right? So ask you the lamp, and then clearly if we move to this direction, we gain lamp, right? And then we can pick any two rows to compare. So for example, you can compare A versus B. Or if you like, you can pick B versus D. You will see you're going to find the same number. But usually I would like use A versus F. That's easier to read, easier to see. Okay? So if we use A to F, the benefit is, so we move from 0 to 250. So that's what you get, okay? 250. Cost, we lose 1,000 so far, right? And then, so the answer is obvious. Okay? The answer is C. To verify what I just said, let's just look at, if we look at A versus B. Okay? So if we move from A to B, and then so you can see the benefit is 50. And then cost is 1,000 minus 800 is 200. All right, so the first one, this is equal to 4. This is also equal to 4. Right? And why? Because we have a straight line. So the slope doesn't change. Right? Okay. So the answer is C. So now there's another exercise can help you to understand the production possibility frontier, and it can also help us understand comparative advantage. Right? So how this game goes? Okay. So essentially, I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Okay, so I'm going to time the time for you, and in 30 seconds. So in the first 30 seconds, I give you 30 seconds. In the first 30 seconds, you just draw as many happy face you can, and then in the second 30 seconds, so you're going to draw as many as elephants you can. And then so later we are going to draw your PBF, and we can also compare two individuals' PBF. From there, so we are going to use those information that's going to lead to the next lecture, right? So let me just start my timer. And so when you are ready, so I'm going to ask you to start. All right. So 1, 2, 3, set, go. So this is for happy face. They just think about we are in a factory. We do some goods, right? Stop. Very good. Okay, so now we do the second one. Ready, set, go. Elephant. It's harder compared to happy face, but I guess different people have different talents, right? But that's the whole point of this exercise. So we have different PPF and we have different advantage. All right, stop. Thanks so much for your cooperation. So I guess just again, so keep these numbers, keep the number you have, and you actually, so you can draw your PPF, you can calculate your own opportunity cost. All right, so keep those numbers, and then later, so we will use that as example to explain more complicated concept, right? But you may want to compare to other person if you find out a partner, right? But just keep those numbers. And to summarize, for now, you just draw your PPF. Just keep your record. You can, and then so you can exchange with others. Right? All right, as I promised earlier, so we have a straight line, okay, in terms of PPF. Now, but in reality, so we may see a PPF like this curve. In mathematics, this is called concave, right? And so what this, how I understand this concavity? So essentially it says the slope of this line is changing and getting larger and larger, right? So actually, so you take the slope, so if the slope here, so absolute value is smaller. But now if you go to here, then absolute value is larger. Right? So this translates into increase in opportunity cost. Meaning, so if we start to produce more and more small jets, and then the cost becomes larger and larger. Right? So how we understand that? So here is the thing. Right? So just imagine we are here. Okay. Just imagine we are in the original point, so that means we didn't produce any other things. Right? So for now we only produce we are here. We only produce Dreamliners. Right? Now, just imagine, because of a change in economic situation, so you want to explore a different market. You want to produce more small jets to serve domestic flights. All right? And now just imagine you are the manager of this business. Right? So if you want to explore new market, and certainly you need to allocate some of your engineer in this new product, right? Then who will you send as the first group of engineer? Do you want to send your best engineer, or you want to send your worst engineer? The answer is usually you want to send your best engineer, right? Because this is like a new territory, new product line. So you want your best engineer to quickly learn those new skills, to quickly capture the market, right? So for example, okay, so the first group of engineer, okay, so they can get this 20, okay? But then the cost for them is because the first group, they cannot work on Dreamliners. And then, so you're going to lose 5. So you can see here, the opportunity cost of small jet, the first group is what? So they gain 20, lose 5. So this is the first group. So that's you start entering this market. Now, once we in the market, okay, we keep moving. Let's say we can, okay, finally realize, okay, so we must continue our expansion in this new market. As I just mentioned, so now who is left in your workplace? Those less skilled workers, right? And though those less skilled worker, so and then so you need more of them to produce civic economy. You want to additional 20, right? And then so you probably need a lot of them, right? And then so these additional workers, in order to produce the same amount of Dreamliners, okay, so you need many of them. So it turns out, so for them, their cost is 25. Right? So basically, they just expand the idea. So in practice, in business, or even in the economy, okay, so we switch from one good to the other. Okay? So we usually allocate the best resource, most efficient resource at the beginning, and then gradually wind down to less efficient. But those less efficient, so then their opportunity cost will increase. Right? So that's the idea. But again, to simplify, so in this class, so without further notice, we assume the PPF is a straight line. Meaning, meaning the opportunity cost won't change as you expand into a new territory, right? So to finish this part, I want to use this simple PPF to explain or to understand economic growth. Okay. So how we understand economic growth? Say this is our PPF at the beginning of 20th century, right? Now, at the end of 20th century, so we are entering a new frontier or new PPF. Now, let's see what's the magic of economic growth. So essentially, we are comparing point A versus point E. Okay, when we start the process of economic growth, E is called infeasible. Meaning, so this is beyond our capacity, right? Infeasible. That's before. Now after growth, now E becomes feasible and efficient. Right? So that's economic growth. But now the question is, what caused us move from A to E? Right? So that's the question. Okay. So from A to E, clearly there's an expansion in frontier. But then, so the question boils down to, okay, what can cause us to move the frontier or move the PPF? What causes us to expand our PPF? Right? Okay, so that is the questions we need to answer. Right. Before I give you answer, let's just do a continuation of the earlier exercise we have done, right? So earlier, we look at practice questions. So you were stranded in the island. So you can either produce 200 mango, or you can produce 100 clam in the previous example. And this was our original PPF. Now, imagine, so you have been in this island long enough, you get bored, and but suddenly you becomes innovative. Actually, this is what happens, right? So you only get bored, and then you start to think about things, or you think aloud, and you get innovative. Right? So now, you become innovative. You invent a clam rack, so that doubles your clam production. So that just means, okay, so now, so your PPF is going to look like, let's use different line, dotted line. So this is your new PPF, right? So you are going to expand. Actually, so this expansion let's go to the previous slides, is similar to expansion from here to here. But then, so in this example, we have part of an explanation. So this expansion coming from new idea or new technology. Let's call ideas or innovation. Right? So this is one possible way to bring us economic growth or to expand our production possibility frontier. Okay? But actually, so there are other possible ways. So now we go to next slide. Okay? So start with two. So there are two possibilities to cause economic growth or to cause the expansion of PPF. One, we can have better technology. Like the previous example just showed to us. So you have a better clamp rack. So that is a technology. Okay? But alternatively, so we can expand our frontier by utilize more factors of production. Right? But then the question is, okay, what is factor of production? So factor of production is defined as resources used to produce goods and service. But what are kind of resource? So that's what we are going to learn in the following slides. Okay. First, or the most important factor of production, and this has been play a major role throughout human history. Okay? But unfortunately, its importance becomes less prominent. But it used to be a crucial determinant in production. It's called land. Okay? But land here, we need to understand that in a broader sense. So this is not only acreage, like how many farmland you have so that you can grow your fruits, vegetable, or rice, or soybean, whatever. It also includes resources inside the land. Think about oil, mineral, natural gas, clean water, right? So on and so forth. Okay. So this is land. But land, usually we understand is limited, right? But it's throughout human history, so we're trying to expand the land we have. Think about in the United States, so there's a great movement to move to the west, but there's a limit. Once we reach Pacific Ocean, we are there, right? Okay. And then someone may say, okay, so we can move to Mars, right? So isn't that Elon Musk says he's going to bring us to Mars and we can settle in Mars? But there's still a limit, right? And plus, in the current technology, it seems like infeasible. It's not like 300 or 400 years ago. So the Mayflower bring us our ancestors from Europe to United States, right? Okay, similar story, but you can see so at the end, so there's a limit, right? And now highlight this limitation or this limit is because later when we look at another resource, so you can see there's a fundamental difference and it completely change how we understand economics and particular economic growth. Okay, so this is land. Second factor is labor. Right? So we need this labor to operate machines. Right? And we also need laborers to carry out some mental activities. Think about like giving a lecture. Think about doing some calculation. All right? And in modern days or in these days, so we also need lots of worker to do the coding. Right? So those like mental work. So this is labor. So apparently its importance is quite obvious. In old days in agricultural economy, so you usually need the workers to plow the land, to sow the seeds, to harvest the corn or soybeans. Right? So this is labor. Now the next one is very important. Okay, so this idea wasn't there until Industrial Revolution. Right? It's called physical capital. So physical capital can be used to produce other goods and services. Okay? In that sense, it's similar to land, because land can be used to produce other goods and services. Either it's a land acreage itself, or the resource inside the land. Think about oil, think about water, think about mineral. So they can be used to produce other goods and services. So in that sense, physical capital is similar to land. But there's a fundamental difference. So physical capital is manufactured items. It's man-made. Okay? And that brings a fundamental difference in the sense, so this is unlimited. Because we can keep manufacturing new goods with other resources. But the land, you cannot, right? So land is given, okay? So depending on what's your religion background, depending on what's your philosophy background, okay? Someone may say it's just given by God. Someone said, okay, this is given by Big Bang, right? But it's given. But manufacture is human creation. We use those resources and keep producing, right? And in modern days, so like in right now, so we have this robot. So this robot is going to create a new robot. This new robot is going to create more manufactured goods. So we break this boundary. Okay, so that's the difference between physical capital and the land. So they are similar, but the key difference is physical capital. We can use physical capital to produce physical capital itself. This kind of rebirth, but not land, right? The last important factor is called human capital. So human capital is something inside the worker, right? Essentially is the educational achievement and the skills of the labor force. Like say, for example, so you come to school, you learn new skills. Okay? You have better understanding how the work works. Okay? And then, so those skills and the knowledge you learn from the school is going to boost up your productivity when you return to the workplace, right? Including ideas, including skills, including the technology, so on and so forth, right? So this is human capital. And also human capital, sometimes we need to think this in a broader sense. Think about institution. Think about how we arrange our workplace, how we arrange our business, right? It's a human capital. Let me give you an idea of the importance of this human capital, okay? And this is the idea, so you're going to see every day during your everyday life. Okay? So just imagine you go to Target or Walmart for checkout, right? And so if you remember, you may not remember. So, or even today, so there are different stores, different strategy. But there's two approach. One approach is, so they have different cashiers, okay? And then so as a customer to check out, you just pick a pick a cashier. You wait in the line. But then sometimes you get a very embarrassing or very unpleasant experience, which is you pick a line, you saw it, so this line is going to be short, but turns out either so the customer in front of you has lots of things to check out or some trouble, or the cashier you pick is an intern and she's not skilled. But now if you want to switch another line, and there's another line already accumulating a lot of customers, right? So this system becomes inefficient, it becomes unfair. Because in some sense, you just need to draw a lottery to pick the right customer. But of course, so the cost here is very low, right? It just costs you additional couple of minutes, right? But still, so there's something we can improve. And turns out there are more and more stores, they choose a different strategy. The strategy is, okay, so instead of let the customer to pick a line, so the customer is gonna wait in the pool. And then, so whenever the cashier is ready, then they call the customer, right? And then, so they are going to avoid the situation I just explained, right? It's small change, but improve the efficiency, right? And then furthermore, now there are more and more stores starts to introduce self-checkout, right? So this self-checkout certainly will rely on the technology. Right? So this self-checkout increase the productivity quite significantly. Right? So that's another example of human capital. And these are like small examples. Okay? But in real world, you're going to see many big examples. So that just make our life, make our society a better world to live. Right? Okay, for this lecture, so I will conclude with a short video for you to watch. Okay. So you feel free to watch on your own device. Okay, but that's going to conclude this this chapter, and then so we are going to move to a new lecture, right?